say something real quick? I think that it, this film has, in the way that Peter wrote it so beautifully, um, the subject matter, I think it transcends color and it transcends sexuality. There's just so many different themes within the movie, so it's not just a Latino movie or it's not a gay movie. It's a film that has, these themes within it, but I think people of all color, white included, white is a color, relate to this.
You are affirmed.
They relate to these subjects.
I think they can relate to it, but on a sense of creating the dialogue, because you can't fight for the black experience unless you're black, unless you're African American. And not to say that it doesn't help, but I think it starts the dialogue where we can then bring in the Caucasian and the different aspects. I just want to see more of us fighting, because that's the biggest fight. And I'm Jamaican. They killed one of the leading activists on Jamaica. They beheaded him, cut his feet off, and cut his legs off, cut his hands off. And they still don't know who murdered him. And my island, my home country, is extremely homophobic. I haven't been back in almost 20 years since my grandfather passed. I'm 40. My grandfather passed when I was in my mid-20s, and I refused to go back because of that. I refused to take my ex-boyfriend. I refused to take him to that island. My parents opened a bed and breakfast down there. I would love to go back home, but the dialogue, I don't think, can be started or even brought into attention until we have more of our faces out there. And I try, as a screenwriter, I've got my gay films and my films for message films that are all inclusive, but I think we need more of that shown before we can bring in the other faces. That's just my opinion.
I've been relatively quiet, so I'll just add this one thing. I think there is something important about what you're saying, and certainly I think what you said about trying to get brown faces onto the screen, people of color onto the screen is a very important opportunity, and also behind the camera, which is something that was alluded to earlier. These are very important factors. But in my, once again, banging on about sophistication, when you watch this film, the thing that I loved was, as I looked around the audience yesterday, and as I read this film, and the images were in my brain, was that you could see in the audience where people were looking at the screen, watching scenes, and there was a little smile or a tear in the eye, and you could see it as my life. You could see lots of different types of faces, lots of different types of people. As they watched the screen and they watched these scenes, it was their life. A guitar string had been plucked, and somehow it was resonating in their heart. And so, yes, it's important for the faces to be the same or similar, but it's also important that stories are told in a way that is sensitive, understanding, brings in enough of the different cultures that people can, of all different kinds, can observe and resonate.
Can I say? I'm glad John said that, because for me, I mean, the thing that floats my boat is I love Native teachings. I love hanging out with the spiritual elders, and so those stories that I hear and those teachings and those ceremonials that our family are part of, that's where the inspiration comes from. And so in this story, and I'm sure every human can relate to this, there's a basic need that we have as human beings, and that is we find our identity in a family, in a culture, in a community. And so the need for community, it's like built in. And so what happens, like John was saying, people see, it doesn't matter if they're Latino or brown, is that there's a family, there's a circle of a community of human beings that love one another, and they have all their ups and downs. But on a more spiritual level, oftentimes, like where we are as a country right now, the shit is thick. There's some really tough choices that are happening. We have nearly destroyed the Mother Earth that gives us life and sustains us. And we're coming to this threshold where either we have to make some drastic changes in how we relate to the earth, to each other, and to ourselves, or our children are going to really be in for some tough times. And so oftentimes when you approach as an individual, I'm sure everyone has gone through this, when you try to make a change within yourself, or to change an attitude that you've had since you could walk. You know, it says like a thought repeated over and over, it becomes a word. A word repeated over and over again becomes an action. An action repeated over and over again becomes your character. Your character is your life. And so when you try to change something like that, it's very painful, because you have to let go of things that you think, that's who I am. And so there's a loss of self, or a death, spiritual death. And so that's really what it's a journey of this man who, there's a catalyst in his life, in his life journey, and he's brought to his knees, where he finally breaks down, and he's in so much pain that he's now willing to make that change. And I think as a people, we're at a very similar place, and that's what Barack is tapping into this morning. We know, like, it's not right. There's something wrong with our way of life, and we know it needs to change. And we're all, I think, a little bit afraid because we don't know what's coming. And I think there are going to be some sacrifices, which he's also alluded to in his speech today. And so, to answer your question, I think the world is in need of stories like that. And George Lucas, when he did the Star Wars trilogy, he read a book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in that book, he looked at thousands of myths, archetypes from around the world, from every culture. And he found this common denominator called the hero's journey. And it's a very masculine journey that usually involves the experience of a young man, a boy becoming a man, a warrior becoming a king. But it's a story of adolescence. And I think as a storyteller, if you look at the films that we gravitate towards, they're like invocations of the hero's journey. We even have like 60-year-old movie stars still putting out stories that are like adolescent films. Rocky Balboa, man, comes out of retirement, like Rocky 6, and motherfucker's 66. His best friend died, his coach, and he's still like resolving conflicts like this. And so the human journey is complex, and so there's beyond the hero's journey, and that's really what interested me in this story. And it's an archetype where the king takes off his crown, and he lets all the violent prerogatives aside, and he moves on to the next stage.
And watching people in the audience and having that string plucked, like for me, I totally had that moment, and I haven't even seen the film yet. I just saw this little clip, and I grew up as the only white kid in all Latino Navajo community. And my brother, who's half Latino, it's the same character, and I'm watching a mirror. And what I would ask you is, and that situation has just recently become resolved. And what was the challenge for you in keeping this dinosaur, in developing the many layers of the onion, and playing from love, like, and that your actions of violence are more geared towards protecting? Were there moments where you went, I don't know if this guy, like,
Well, of course, because he was flawed, that was the draw for me. And, I didn't come fresh to it. It was something we developed over time. His story, his design of character, but we developed it over several years. But the thing that we hit on that needed to be the spine really for the character, for whatever flaws he has, is that he has to be a person of love, even if he's totally and completely unaware of it or unwilling to acknowledge it. And so even in that violently confrontational moment, it's not just anger. You can actually feel heartbreak. And I thought it was important from an actor's responsibility to not demonize the character.